Hi there, welcome to the show, ChitChat. I'm here, Hafsa Islam. As usual, I have a guest, someone very important, I would say, Amy Neilson Smith. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
And I'm so glad that you're here because I heard so much about you and I read your biography and it seems so interesting. But before we go on in depth on the conversation, let me find out about yourself. If you can tell me something about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I am a poet and also a performing artist. And in the last 6 to 8 years, I've been running my own charity initiative called A Blind Bit of Difference, which is the book you've got on the table.
Yeah.
And I use poetry and the power of metaphor in poetry and art, particularly with young disabled people, to open the gates of communication. And recently I've been doing it all over the world as well, in places like Brazil and Bangladesh and Africa.
Wow, interesting. 3 countries. So how did you get inspired to become a poet?
How did I decide to become a poet? I was always at school. I quite liked being at school, but I do have a tendency to daydream. And
I think most of the poets, they daydream.
We live in a dream world most of the time.
It's true.
You'd find my books, particularly like subjects I didn't really like maths. At the back, I'd have scribblings of things I was writing. I was always performing from a very young age, and I had my first professional dancing show at 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
When I was a tap dancing rat in Dick Whittington in a theatre, and then always performed. So I was always in and around poetry. Loved Shakespeare. And one particular thing, when I started writing seriously, my mum got cancer when I was 15. She's still alive. She had it again and she survived twice. But I think when I was 15 it was quite a shock and I wrote a lot about it. And later on I wrote more about it. But that sort of was my first kind of real trauma.
Do you remember your first poem?
I don't remember my first. I remember sort of the collection of things I was writing. And one of my first poems was published in a book called Soul Feathers. By Macmillan Cancer and Indigo Dreams Publishing, and it was one of the only things I ever sent out, and I was amazed that I got selected. I actually emailed and checked if they got it wrong, because Mayor Angelou was in it. They had permission from Mayor Angelou, Benjamin Zephaniah, Carol Ann Duffy, and they had really big people and then little minions like me in it as well. But that was one of my first poems, and that was about my mum's cancer. So.
Oh, wow. Maybe because it's a subjective poem that it kind of touched someone's heart.
Yeah, just all came out. It wasn't really planned or edited, so it's one of those.
Well, that's really good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
A Blind Bit of Difference. That's the book. Do you want to tell me some details about this?
Yep, that's our sensory poetry anthology. So the poems inside, it's our first ever book that the charity produced. It started as a game in a school with visually impaired students, and because we talked about inclusivity and what they feel included in and what they don't feel included in. And one of the things that they didn't feel included in was colour. Because they felt as visually impaired, most of them didn't have much of a perception of colour. So I started brainstorming, and I was working with lots of sensory artists at the time using synesthesia, which is when one sense turns into something else. So someone with synesthesia could hear music and they taste something. This is technically a medical condition. And I learnt about it and I was like, wow, that's fascinating. So in a playful way, we started playing with colour, and we had food which you would eat and try and describe the sensations instead of colour. So this is all from students. So a student wrote a poem called We Do Make a Blind Bit of Difference. So they do make a change in the world, even though they're disabled. And so he wrote a poem, which then went in the book, and I decided to call the book after his poem. And then after several weeks, when I was thinking about getting funding, because they'd done so well to produce a theatre production, I called the charity that. So yeah.
Wow, that's really good. I know you went to Bangladesh. How did that come about?
How did Bangladesh come about? I am a performing artist and poet, as I said, and there's an amazing performing company in the UK called Sauda Arts.
Yeah.
As you know, I saw met you at a production.
That's how we met.
Yeah. And Ahmed Kaiser, who you know as well, is the director.
Yeah.
They've performed at iconic venues like the Royal Albert Hall, and they're going there again for a production of Sylvia Plath, which I'm in, and also at the Rich Mix. Anyway, so I perform for them a lot. So they're my British Bengali community, and I got invited on a poetry tour of Bangladesh by Reza, who's the president of Sauda Arts.
Okay.
And there's a festival called the Sona Bangla Festival.
Okay.
And
that's in Bangladesh?
Yes, it is, yeah. It's near Dhaka. And so we started there, and we did a little tour of the libraries and places, and then also did a bit of travelling in Sylhet and places like that. So that's how that came about, really.
Wow. And now that you're working with the Bangladeshi orphanage.
That's right. I'm working with Lido. I call them my Bangla babies.
Okay.
So that's me in an orphanage in Dhaka. So the charity Lido, they rescue street children, which they also get called the railway children because they travel a lot on the railways. And they rescue them and take them to their orphanage and school them and clothe them and counsel them and try and get them back either back to their parents or find new parents for them, so get them adopted. And it was just a wonderful experience because of my charity work here, where I also work with disabled children. They had a disabled unit, so I went to work using sensory practices at the orphanage, and I'm going back. It got postponed.
Do you think, working with disabled children in Bangladesh, do you think there are enough disabled provision that's happening in Bangladesh?
I was only there for quite a limited time. When I'm planning on going back to do a much longer project, a film project documenting a child's journey. Where I was at Lido, the provision was actually amazing, and it was. If I'm honest, a lot better than I was expecting, because I've worked in other countries where there hasn't really been anything. All of the teachers that were in the disability unit were all trained, had really amazing English, so it meant working with them was very easy because I'm only just starting to learn Bangla, so I'm struggling, but I'm trying.
I was going to ask you, what were the challenges and obstacles that you have faced in working with these children in Bangladesh?
Language is obviously... but you would think it was a lot more of a problem than it actually was, because they were all quite young, as you see from the picture, sort of 7, 8, 9, the ones I worked with. And a couple of things, the teachers were amazing with English, so the interpretation was great. And the thing about sensory practices is a lot of it is taste and smell and dance. So there's so much communication happening without language being the key.
Most of the time we think language is very important. I mean, it is important, but at the same time, somebody they cannot speak, or somebody deaf, somebody dumb. Still, there is other way of getting them to understand and communicate. Many of us don't have that kind of knowledge, but people like yourself working with them, NGOs working with them, they can get these children to flourish.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the key things is food. Children love eating.
How is that?
Because children love eating. They want to do it, and it gets them talking. It's always something that gets the children talking and experiencing, and it's very real. So a lot of, particularly like some autistic students and those with complex needs don't necessarily have the imagination to just imagine something when they're told it. They need it to be real and happening. Yeah. So if they have a smell, it stimulates the imagination and your nervous system is stimulated. So it's moving into something very biological. Yeah.
I mean, also, there, our 5 senses that works, and maybe one sense doesn't work, but the other senses works, and then that kind of stimulate the whole procedure of learning, and like you said, touch, smell, visual, then taste. That kind of, it does work. That doesn't matter if you're blind or if you're deaf, still this kind of things work. So.
And it's a shared experience.
It is.
So if we're both tasting the same thing, we're experiencing the same thing, so it's creating a connection. So even within a disability unit, there's so many different needs and so many, like you said, if it all varies the senses, but taste is definitely one, unless you don't have taste, but that's quite rare. That brings people together because it is a shared experience in that moment. So,
and, like you said, food is one thing that it gets everybody together. Working with any community, food is the thing that brings people together, and sharing the food that makes it. If you can't speak the language, doesn't matter. But still, food or something. Similar interest brings them together. It's like we were discussing the other day that smoking, if somebody smokes and say, I don't smoke, so I can't be
in the smokers
group, right? But if I was smoking, then I could be with the smokers group, and then I can share my ideas, my thoughts with them, because maybe in the office we are working together, but we're very busy, can't talk. But that's the only time I know. You get together and then you discuss other things. And so it's good to, having similar kind of interest, which I don't smoke, I don't drink, so I don't know. I can't have that kind of, moments talking to people. But someone I know, she was saying she needed to speak to somebody, so she went out and she started pretending smoking with the person, so she can
be part of the community.
Yeah, part of the community of that, and get some support to get to know that person. So that's how it is. Some people, they do take extra challenge.
I think it's also very personal, eating.
It is.
It's a very personal thing to do with somebody. It's kind of like sharing something just so human. If we need it to live, we need it to survive. It's kind of even that basic kind of sharing, as well as fine dining and whatever else.
Anyway, the countries, you said you were working with Brazil and Africa and Bangladesh. Which country do you find it very challenging? The most challenging one?
Most challenging... Probably Africa, actually. We went to...
What aspect?
We didn't really get to travel on the project. We had a very short period of time. I had my main core team with disabled artists from the UK and my filmmaker, Kate Dangerfield, and Zara Jane. She was our lead disabled artist on the project called Sensory Microphone. So we went over, and Gustavo Diol was our producer. Sorry, not producer, he was our assistant director. He's actually Brazilian. So that we went over and had a very short time. So we went to the village. We had a choice to stay nearer in the city and then commute each day. But Kate's very much guerrilla filmer. She wants to get in on the action, so we're there and we're living the experience and really connect with their local way of living. So I also agreed. I thought that was a good idea, and it was, but it meant we didn't get much time to explore. So it was it was just a very small village, and they weren't really used to white people. So that was quite a culture shock. And there wasn't really any way that we sort of went and still saw other stuff. So that was just it, really. It was lack of time, just big cultural differences. So I suppose, Africa was probably most challenging.
Which country you had the most cultural shock?
Culture shock. Probably Africa, but it's just because we went straight into village living. So you had to, like, within a day, because I like to do it properly if I travel, I want to do what the locals do. So we went straight into eating with our hands. I hadn't been to Bangladesh yet. So when I went to Bangladesh, I was like, I'll eat with my hands, it's fine. So I know I even love doing it now when I'm back in the UK.
You mentioned you're an educator. What kind of education do you
work in?
Yeah.
I am a sensory poetry educator. That's my...
What does that mean?
What does it mean? I teach disabled children or those with complex needs and autism how to access poetry in a different way, because a lot of their imaginations work in a very different way and won't immediately imagine something. So if I used a poem in a class, I would have a table full of sensory engagement. So it would be lots of smells that are in the poem that will help them stimulate their imagination. There might be objects that they could hold and feel. So you're bringing the poem alive in an experience, and I think all schools should do it anyway.
Wow. That sounds very interesting. I'd like to be there.
Yeah. Oh, I do adult ones as well. I'm going to be running some big sensory events in London soon, and it's open to everyone. It's also bridging the gap between disabled and non-disabled people. Wow. So
yeah, that sounds really interesting. You had poetry tour, and also you do dance educator.
That's true. I'm a dance educator, yeah. I started as a dancer. That was the first thing I trained in when I was very little. And I carried on dancing all the way through my teens into my early 20s. I was doing contemporary dance in my early 20s, and then branched more into acting and writing. So I ended up going more down that path. But I still love it, and I really love dance as a medium. It's one of my favourite things to go and watch. Because you can turn off the language brain.
Wow. You mentioned in one of your biography that this person, well, it's a girl, I think, one of the child, she's writing her second book. Second collection, Beautiful Bangladesh.
No. That's actually me that's writing that.
Oh, okay.
I'm writing. That's my first collection is called Dark Matter, which you've got a copy of, and that was written 10 years ago, I think.
So this is the Dark.
That's Dark Matter, yeah. Which is the thin line between lust and destruction, and also matters of the heart, really, the dark matters of the heart, sown with a lifeline of light. That's what one of the reviewers said. So that was a long time ago, and I had been published in things, but I'd never really been inspired to write a new book. Okay. And I loved Bangladesh so much, the whole experience and the people and the culture, that I started writing about the orphanage and the orphans, and also lots of the sort of more not jungle, but kind of rural areas, which was so beautiful. So it's inspired a new book. So at the moment, it's called Beautiful Bangladesh.
Love to read it
when
it comes out. So when are you planning to publish that?
I'm gonna have to work on it all year. So it will probably be in a draft ready to start sharing with publishers early next year. So
what's your plan for the next? I know that you are saying you're going to Bangladesh.
Yeah, I'm hopefully going. I've been invited again in January to something.
And in March you're traveling to India.
In March I'm going to India for the first time. Yeah.
And what's your plan for Bangladesh next?
Next time. With Lido, I'm going to apply for funding from, I think, probably the British Council. They funded our project Sensory Microphone in Africa. So the door was always open, so it would be good to go back to them. My plan is the orphans they're rescued, and then they spend only 6 weeks in the care of the orphanage, when they're schooled and counselled and educated, and they still keep in contact with everyone and they're cared for still, but they try to return them to their birth parents or for them to be adopted. And I think that would be an amazing way to make a film to raise the profile of Lido, so that they can get much wider sponsorship, because they still rely on public funding. So, yeah.
And how did you manage to get the funding for the other projects that you've done?
Africa was British Council. So the pandemic had just finished. I'd looked after my dad with dementia for the pandemic, so I just left my parents' home and moved back to London again, to my home. And I'd been back, I think, 5 days, and I get a call from the African director who I'd worked with in the UK saying, Amy, we've got this big application and we think me and your charity should work together and you should come to Africa. Yeah, so I was like, okay. First challenge after the pandemic, and we got our funding, and so we went on that money, and we gifted them, and they workshopped everything, so we paid them incredibly well. They got a very good fee, so that raises the status
of work you carried out in Africa.
They have a theatre company company called Kado Urax,
Right.
and the director is called Diol Mamadou, and he's the director I worked with in the UK. And their
Right.
theatre company is Forum Theatre, so it's really big political.
Okay.
You sort of swap roles with the audience. It's incredibly interactive. So we worked with their theatre company. Some of them were disabled and some of them weren't disabled.
Right.
But they kind of just do everything as normal. And we went and did sensory practices. So we shared the eating and the smell and things like that in workshop
Right.
to try and infuse more sensory work into their theatre.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. So whatever work you do is more to do with sensory.
Yeah,
Everything to do with sensory.
basically everything, yeah. Because I believe, and people, once they've had the experience, it opens up a whole new world of communication, and the opposite of communication is when everything goes wrong.
So you go and teach them how to use that tools.
Yeah, tools.
So once that tool's been used, do you think people carries on using the same tools, and do you exercise the parents, and do they get exercised that this is what they should do with their children, or do you work with the basically did you work with the parents and
in Africa, it was actually an adult cast, but in Bangladesh, it was young people. And when we were there in Bangladesh, so if I'm in an educational setting, which Bangladesh was, all of the teachers loved it and said they're going to use it more in their practices, and particularly some of the disability teachers who already know about it, but are not quite in the way that we were doing it. So in that case, yes. Africa, they said they're going to input more of it into their theatre shows because it's so interactive with the audience. An example was, not a happy one, but they had a theatre piece about abortion, which most of their culture see as wrong. So it's a big political debate as to whether people should or shouldn't. And they had a baby, and I said if you wanted to extend that sensory metaphor, the baby, it could be wet. And you could hand it to some of the audience. It's a doll. It didn't look like a baby. It was just like a dark kind of puppet. It had no features, so it's very symbolic. And I just said, what an impact as an idea if that was then put in water, so it was technically blood or whatever, and then handed. What a deeper impact that would have on somebody. So it's picking core moments in your production where that sensory input would heighten what you're experiencing.
As you were saying about the abortion and all that, in India, maybe when you go to India, there are a lot of abortions taking place because as soon as they find out it's going to be girl baby, certain area of India still they believe in, having girl babies, not what they want boys.
Yeah.
And how the chromosomes works, they don't have the knowledge of it, so it's another issue there. Maybe you should work on something
like that.
Like that.
I have heard about that. I've been told a lot about that. So I'm deeply feminist. I'm a big feminist in this country. A lot of my work is very feminist. Some of my poems are. And when Kaiser, who I work for Sauder Arts, he knows I'm a feminist, so he always gives me a platform to, Sylvia Plath was essentially a feminist, so I'm going to be reading as her in some of the production at Rich Mix soon. So I've got platforms, so it's good to use.
Yeah, in Bangladesh, similarly, I think still people believe in, girls' baby are expensive, boys are, but not as much as India.
Yeah.
And I think people has come away from that in Bangladesh, but still there is a issue based on girl being born within the family. Yeah. Some families, if they have more than 2-3 girls, then that's it. They have issues. So, as soon as they find out then there's going to be another girl, then there is a problem. Yeah. So it's quite sad. Yeah. But babies are babies. They shouldn't do any of that kind of sort.
No.
What is your most favorite work that you have carried out in which country?
What's my most favourite work that I've carried out in which country? I'll sort of give 2 short ones. Personally, for me as an artist performing, I've loved so many of my projects, but I love directing and I love film producing and I love doing all of that side, which has been a development only in the last 8 years of my career. But I still love performing. That's how I was born into it. So in Prague, I worked in Prague with a director called Teresa Stelikova. She's a sensory artist and a sensory filmmaker. we were selected from a team of 80 from around the world, so 80 designers or sensory artists, met in Prague, and it was for the Prague Quadrennial Festival, which is every 4 years, and we had got given a stadium, and our team of 80 of us, and it was a totally empty, massive stadium, and we had to build by hand an entire set for the audience to come and have an performance experience. So lots of it was VR, so virtual reality, so that wasn't my area. And then we had a sensory area, so very real, very tactile, very smell orientated, very human, into like versus VR. And building that was incredible. And then I was one of only 2 performers out of the whole team, so we got to bring the space to life. And I was non-verbal, so I could make noises and bring people into the space. So to have built a set, performed in a set, taken down a set, and I was a poet, so I wrote poetry. The objects had voices. We didn't quite get as far as implementing them into the landscape, but that was the next thing. So that's probably the most immersive experience I've ever had. That was one of my best jobs. On my last day, I stayed by myself, and the cast had gone. And I thought, if I die now, I'm happy, because I've had one of the best art jobs I've ever done. And with a blind bit of difference. I couldn't possibly say. Possibly the first ever showcase with those students, because it was our birth. And it's very hard working in schools. And some of the students are still, the front cover is done by an artist, Rakaya. Rakaya Art is her Instagram. That was when she was 14, and she's got very little sight, and now she's been to college and is graduating soon. And she's a sensory artist and mainly sculptor. We're still in contact, and she's performing with us at the festival, which we'll meet on the 9th and 10th.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It would be nice to meet.
Yeah, because you kind of follow their success story. So I think probably The Birth was probably my favourite. Yeah.
Do you want to read something from any of the books? One of your writing, maybe from there, from
Dark
the
Sun.
Matter.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay.
One of your poems.
I'm going to read you. I'm going to read you The Tempest.
Okay.
For 2 reasons. Kaiser, who's the director of Sauder, this is one of his favourites. Okay. And I'm going to be performing this on the 29th of this month at a Sauder Art celebration. So this is for Kaiser as well. Okay. He's my British Bangladeshi friend, and I champion his work. So this is in protest. So, you'd like me to read it to you?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a tempest in me. There's a tempest in me. You rocked the boat, and now splinters of shattered deck and torn sails are left vomited over the rocks and barnacles lining my insides. Aborted oyster pearls roll around the contours of my stomach. Acidic marbles. There's a tempest in me. Prospero lies dead just under my heart, sharing spilling blood with my atrium. His staff cracked to pieces. A withered corpse now, not a wizard. A broken back now, cracked like an egg on a rock. Magic leaked from his torn body, skin weeping, bleeding his wizardry into the sea. There's a tempest in me. Miranda wades in grief, screams at the waves for taking her father, screams as Caliban now creeps into her bed on lonely nights, creeps into her head, dances in her dreams covered in his own cum. She doesn't know yet, but she carries his son. There's a tempest in me. Dance, Ariel, dance, like the little devil you are, free now he's dead. Fly, Ariel, fly, like the little bat that you are, free now he's dead. Dance on his grave, you little gremlin, you never loved him anyway. Be you boy or girl or being or beast, you're free now. Trapped spirits only taunt souls. Collect like rocks. There's a tempest in me. Trinculo's forgotten how to jest, lost his trinket. Stefano's ran out of beer, his goblet gaunt. Froth dried like flaking skin to his scarlet cheeks. They're not funny anymore, they've forgotten how to laugh. They're not funny anymore, they've forgotten how to laugh. They are not funny anymore, they've forgotten how to laugh. The tremulous tightrope of subplot they balance along snapped. Got lost along the way and were eaten by bears in a cave as they slept next to the carcass and crown of our dear friend Leah. There's a tempest in me. I'm sick and I throw up seawater. There's a clear reflection in the puddle I see. There's a tempest in me. I see your face in this frothy mirror. There's a tempest in me. Calm mornings turn into tricky afternoons thinking of you. There's a tempest in me. Can you see? And you are the dark eye of that storm.
Wow, that's amazing. What made you write that poem?
I love storms and tempests and water. I'm a water sign, I'm Scorpion.
I'm a Scorpion.
Are you? Scorpion women, we have a lot of power.
Rock.
Yeah, we rock.
Yeah.
So I love storms, and I literally get butterflies if it's stormy. I go and run in the rain.
Wow.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. That's why I loved Bangladesh. It's so, even when it was wet and raining, I loved it. And in Africa, we had a monsoon, and I was like, I love it. Everyone thought I was crazy. And I loved The Tempest, obviously, because of that reason. And that's a complete mashup of the story. I love ruining stories and rewriting them. So
yeah, but it kind of touched my heart because there is a part where it says about whether they're blind or whether they're, doesn't matter. They should.
Yeah. There's something to.
Exactly. So it's really nice. Wow.
Thank you.
So anyway, I think we have nearly time to finish. So before we leave, if you want to say to the audience, any messages for the audiences?
Any messages? Yep, if you want to follow what I'm doing, if you're interested in my performing arts, in my career, in my poetry, I mainly use Facebook. So I'm Amy Neilson Smith on Facebook. On Instagram, we have a Blind Bit of Difference, so we have an Instagram on there. We only really use it when we're running projects, but we're trying to run it more regularly now. And yes, when I'm running big fundraisers, which I'm going to be in the winter, we're going to be running fundraisers for Lido in the UK, and they're going to be big cultural Bangladeshi events as well, with lots of poets. And this is my scarf from the DIG, the Deputy Inspector Governor of Bangladesh, who's supporting me as well when I next go over to do the project. Wow. So,
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for coming to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Really enlightened with your words and with your work. And hopefully you should come, maybe different episode of different topics.
Yeah, definitely.
Discuss, like, in future.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that was for today, and I will be back with new guest on ChitChat show. Please stay tuned with us in LB24. Bye-bye.
What have I done?
You are mistaken, officer. I don't have a single illegal person here.
He is an illegal immigrant and he doesn't have the right to work here.
You'll be receiving a letter from Immigration Enforcement very soon.
If you had spent just £10 on the right to work check, you'd not have £60,000 fines.
Spend £10. Save up to £60,000. Yeah!